give you a marshmallow. If you want, you can eat this straight away, or you can wait for a bit until I come back into the room and you'll get a second marshmallow. Okay? I'll leave it up to you. I'm going to leave the room for a bit. Bye-bye. Okay, girls, how did you do? You haven't eaten yours. And what happened to yours, Bea? Where is it? What, it's there in your tummy? Is it? So you couldn't wait for another one. So you, as a reward, get another marshmallow. What do you think of that?
Great.
Tasty?
Yeah, it kind of stings, doesn't it? Yeah. Right? Especially when it's something that you know you're going to love to have. Sometimes waiting, it can feel like an eternity. You know the old saying, a washed pot never boils. When you're watching it thinking, when is this going to happen? It seems like it takes forever. Especially when it's something you really, really want. You know, in that video we just saw, that is kind of a redoing of an old experiment that they call the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. This experiment was first done in the 1970s. They took some kids, they stuck marshmallows in front of them, and said, I will be back, you can eat this marshmallow anytime you want, but I will be back shortly, and then I will give you a second one if you have not eaten it yet. And so they left the room, and some of the kids ate and some of them didn't. So in the first study, it kind of came to the conclusion that the kids that waited for the second marshmallow, that they had self-control, and that they would one day grow up to be really successful adults because they didn't want the instant gratification. They were willing to wait for more later. But then later on, they've done this thing a lot of different times, and some of the things that they've been coming up with lately is the fact that most of the kids that ate the marshmallow before the guy came back, they didn't do it because they were impatient. They did it because they just didn't trust the person that told them they'd give them another one. They didn't know him. They only met the guy and they're like, I'm not really sure, he's taking a long time. I'm not really sure if he's going to do what he said he's going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and eat this thing. And so they were motivated not by selfish reasons or not by instant gratification. They were more motivated by not knowing if they can trust the person that told them to wait. Now, has anybody ever made you a promise that you've had to wait on? That, hey, we're going to go do this, but now you have to wait for it to happen. Anybody ever done that? You know, we've done that. You know, we're like, hey, we're going to go on vacation. This is what we're going to do. Now you've had to wait on it. And sometimes waiting can be fun. I mean, you kind of build up your anticipation. You kind of get excited. Like, oh man, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do this. All these different things. We kind of messed with our kids one year and told them that we're living in Texas. And we're like, we're going to go to Orlando, but we can't afford to go to Disney World, so we're going to go to Disney Springs because it's free, you know. And so the kids were picking out all these different things in Disney Springs. They didn't know we actually bought tickets to Disney World, and so they were excited and disappointed at the same time whenever we got here. So sometimes waiting can be exciting because you build up that anticipation, but what happens when that promise gets delayed, or when that promise kind of extends out a little bit further than you thought? You know, Stephanie and I were planning on going on a cruise last summer for our 20th anniversary. So we were planning this thing, kind of getting excited, and then it just kind of got stopped. And so all of that anticipation, kind of like, oh man, now. And so we still want to go on one, still planning to go on one at one point, but it's been drawn out for so long, it kind of comes to the point where I don't know where this is ever going to happen, right? And sometimes whenever we're promised something and it keeps dragging out and thinking, oh man, this is ever, we kind of start to lose hope, right? Thinking, man, is this ever going to happen? You know, the girl in the video, that's probably what happened with her. She's like, he's never going to come back. I'm going to eat this thing right now, right? And so sometimes when those promises get drawn out, we kind of end up kind of losing our hope, kind of losing that anticipation, thinking it's never going to happen. And so we just kind of push it off like whatever, and we start to make other plans. And there's a story, or there's a man and a woman in the Bible that kind of lived that out in their life. His name is Abram. You guys probably know him as Abraham. His name gets changed later to Abraham. But for the first part of the story, his name is Abram. He becomes the father of Judaism and Christianity. Did you guys ever grow up? What of you grew up in the church ever heard the song Father Abraham?
Had many
And
sons.
many sons. Many sons.
That followed Abraham.
This is the guy they're talking about. Okay, so Abram, God worked through Abram thousands of years ago to accomplish a plan. He promised Abraham something, and Abram had to wait for that thing to happen. In Genesis chapter 12, it says, the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your people and your father's household, to the land I will show you. So he's like, leave your family and everything you own and go to this land. I'm not even going to tell you where you're going yet. I'll show you when you get there. So, that's a pretty big thing. It says, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be blessed. When he says, I'm going to make you into a great nation, that means I'm going to give you a lot of offspring, and your people are going to be a great nation, a great group of people. It says, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you. That's why in the song when it says, had many sons, I am one of them, and so are you, because we've all been blessed through Abram because of the promise that God was giving him. So, Abram was just this ordinary guy. He wasn't like this great big, a preacher or anything. He was just an ordinary dude living his life, and God came to him and gave him a very unordinary promise. Gave him a very extraordinary promise. This promise was big for Abraham. In those days, having children meant you were blessed. Like if you were able to have a lot of kids, it kind of showed, people saw that as God's hand being on you. And so for God to say that you're not just going to have a kid, but you're going to have, your family's going to be this great nation, that just showed that God's hand was, on him. And Abram had to have felt very special and very blessed and very honored for God to tell him that. But it was also a big promise for the world. God promised to make Abraham's descendants God's special people, his chosen people. He promised to make his family into this great, not just a great nation, but a great nation that God is going to be with and take care of and be a part of. That God's going to choose them, God's going to take them and make them separate from the rest of the world. That's a big promise for the world to have. Abram and Sarah and his wife, Abram and Sarah his wife, they had to be thinking, oh man, first of all, why is God going to pick me? But just kind of things going through their mind, like, man, you want me to leave my family, everything I've ever known, travel to this land, I don't even know where I'm going yet, and that'd be nerve-wracking, right? But they chose to obey God. Even though they didn't know where they were going to end, they chose to obey God. They picked up their lives and hit the road and traveled. Now they didn't get to crawl into this fancy RV, all nice and comfortable AC. They piled up on donkeys and horses and walked and dragged things for miles and miles and days and months and years to get to where God was taking them. And while they were doing that, they were thinking, all right, God, you said you're going to make a nation. When's that going to happen? And during that time, they just had to trust and believe that God was going to send them children. In Genesis 15 tells us that after this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram, for I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? The one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. So Abram is kind of ticked off when you're reading this. God said, hey, I'm going to give you a great nation. You're going to have so much family. It's going to cover, you come to this great nation. And he's like, God, we've been waiting. You've not given us you've not done what you said you're going to do. What's going on? So he's kind of questioning the promise that God has given him. And then verse 4 says, Then the word of the Lord came to him, This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he counted him as righteous. So Abraham's like, what's going on, God? You promised this. I've been waiting patiently. We've been doing what you've asked. He's kind of sitting there thinking, I'm not eating the marshmallow yet, God. Where's my second? It's like, what's going on? And God's like, hey, be patient a little bit longer. You ever had that? Your parents ever tell you that? Just be patient a little bit longer. Yeah. I always hated that. Just be patient a little bit longer. I hate that now as an adult. Patient a little bit longer. You're on hold thing, pop up on, hello, and you're like, oh, great, now I'm finally talking. You're second in line. I was second in line 10 minutes ago. Just saying, hey, be patient a little bit longer. Abram was stuck waiting to receive God's promises. He didn't have the timeline. He didn't know how things were going to go. He didn't know what was going to happen next. But all he had was that promise. And he had that promise from God. Hey, I've got this. I told you what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. So he was kind of put on the wait list. I mean, he was officially waitlisted, put there. All right, you've got to wait. After 10 years, can you imagine waiting for something for 10 years? After 10 years of waiting for God to fulfill His promise, Abraham and Sarai felt very discouraged, and they were pretty impatient. Discouragement can lead to doubt. Doubt can make you do some very questionable things. When you get discouraged, you start doubting things. When you start doubting things, you start making bad choices. It's just the way it's the way life is. I've seen it in my own life, and I've seen it in other people's lives. So we tend to take matters into our own hands when we start to get discouraged, right? And that's exactly what happens in chapter 16. We started off in chapter 12. We're already here in chapter 16, and we still don't have a baby yet. There's a lot of waiting, isn't it? And now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So Abram agreed to do what Sarai said. And so after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant, and she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think is best. Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. Now, kind of a crazy story. But with Sarah, I'm sure in the beginning, Sarai had the best intentions, right? And just kind of how everything, a lot of bad things happen, they start with the best intentions, right? You know, Sarai's like, hey, I'm not having any kids. God said you're going to have some kids. Maybe God's going to give you kids or somebody else. So here, take this person, and we can help God fulfill His plan this way. She's wanting to help God fulfill His plan. You know, sometimes we do that in our own life. And we're like, hey, God, I got an idea to do this thing that you said that you wanted done. Let's try it this way. When we do that, things tend to mess up. And we see that here with Sarah. Things tend to mess up. She was probably thinking, I'm sure she thought she was helping God. But whenever Hagar conceived and had a kid, what happened? She got jealous. She's like, oh man, she had a kid and I couldn't? That's just not. And that jealousy started welling up inside. And jealousy always leads to negative things. She started treating her badly, always to the point where she ran off because she was being treated so horribly. God had promised her tons of descendants, but Sarah didn't trust God to follow through with the promise. You know, Abram's over here saying, all right, God, you said you're going to do this. When is this going to happen? And then God said, hey, just a little bit longer. He's like, okay. Sarah's over here saying, all right, God, you said this is going to happen. It isn't happening. I know what. I'm going to take matters in my own hands. It's like she picked up that marshmallow. She just ate it on down. Because she was impatient. Not only was she impatient, but she didn't trust God to fulfill His promise. And in Genesis 17, finally, in Genesis 17, after 25 years of waiting, y'all ain't even 25 yet. 25 years of waiting. That is a long time. Abram is 99 years old. 99 years old. Sarai is 90 years old. God went and changed their name to Abraham and Sarah. So that's where Father Abraham comes from. And then finally, 90-year-old Sarah gives birth to Isaac, their promised son. 25 years after God's promise. That's a long wait list. But it happened. God followed through. He came through on that promise. And you know, God could have been like, you know what? You've been complaining. You tried to do things your own way. He could have been like, you know what? I'm going to go find somebody else that's going to trust me. But He didn't do that. He could have punished them. He could have abandoned them, could have left them. But instead, God decided to give them grace. Decided to love them through their mess-ups, through their doubts. God went ahead and fulfilled that promise. It's like if you ate your marshmallow, God came in and said, "Hey, you ate your marshmallow." God, I know I just couldn't wait any longer. You know, God's like, all right, you know what? Here you go. Here's 2 more anyway, because I love you that much. It's kind of what He did. They did everything wrong. I mean, not everything wrong. I mean, they totally just tried to do things on their own. They didn't fully trust Him, and God said, you know what? I love you anyway. I promise this to you, and we're going to make it happen. I don't know what promises you're waiting on. I don't know what things are going on in your life. I don't know what things you're looking at in the future. You know, I don't know if you pray and ask God for something and you're waiting for Him to give you that answer. You know, I don't know that, but tell you something I do know. You know what I know? Is that I don't know when that promise will be answered, but I know that it will be. Because I know that God can be trusted to answer His promises. But I also know He doesn't always answer them the way we want them to be answered. Right? You know, Sarah wanted a baby long before she was 90. But that's not what God's plan was. So we have to be willing to follow God's plan. We have to be willing to step back and say, all right, however you're going to do this, I'm going to let you do it. Mm-hmm. You know, even if it's not having a kid until I'm 90. Even if it's, you know, not having a home and I'm moving around to different states and doing different things, or until I'm an older adult, because I'm doing all these different things. Even if it's traveling to other countries to be a missionary and stuff, you know, whatever that is, God has in store for you. We have to be willing to step back and say, hey, all right, God, I'm going to let you take care of it. Even if it's working at the local Walmart, sharing Jesus with the people through the line. Whatever God's promise is for you, whatever His plan is, you have to be willing and ready to accept that. Just like Abraham and Sarah had to accept that. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 7 says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. He didn't say, hey, make a plan and I'm going to help you and I'll make sure it happens. He said, submit to Him. Not in the easy ways, in all your ways. Submit to Him and say, God, I can't, you know, whatever it is, I can't do this without you. It is all yours. Submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. He will lead you down the road that you need to go. And if you are on God's path, if you are in God's will for your life, no matter what junk is being thrown at you, it's an easy road to go. Even with all the bumps and all of the junk that Satan throws at you, if you're in God's will, if you're allowing Him, if you've submitted your life to Him, it makes it an easier path to follow. You're still going to have hard times and struggles, but God's going to be there with you throughout that. Like Abraham and Sarah, who waited for years, can you imagine waiting 25 years for something? They waited for years for God to give them a child. Here's the message I want you to understand. If God has a plan. He has a plan for each and every person in this room. Amen. You may not know what it is yet. You may not understand what it is. You may know, all right, God, something's out there for me. I know it. You know, growing up, I wanted to be. First, I wanted to be a police officer. Then I wanted to be a firefighter. Not because I wanted to be a police officer or a firefighter, but I knew I wanted to help people. But I didn't know how. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s before I finally understood what God was telling me. And I went to the ministry. God has a plan. I don't know what that plan is for you. It may be to be a missionary or a preacher. It may be just to work, to work in a regular job as a nurse, a doctor, whatever. God has a plan for you. But sometimes we gotta wait for that plan to happen. We have to wait. I worked 2 jobs and struggled thinking, all right, God, I don't know what, I just knew what I was doing wasn't what God wanted me to do. I did all different types of things trying to figure it out until God finally just smacked me upside the head with it. And sometimes that's how it happens. You have to wait. Some people don't wait. Some people don't have to wait. God's like, this is what you're doing. They know from the beginning, all right, this is what I'm doing, and they never change their ideas. Some people change their mind every week. But if you submit yourself to the Lord, He will guide you to that plan. So what are you waiting on? What are some things that you're waiting on in your life? Are you waiting for a change in your life? Are you like, God, something's got to change? Whatever that is. In your family, friends, life, whatever. Are you waiting for some kind of a change in your life? Maybe you're waiting for a change in your heart. Maybe you have some issues in your heart thinking, all right, God, you got to fix this. Maybe you're waiting for a new opportunity. Maybe you're looking for some new opportunity. Maybe you pray, and you're waiting on an answer for a prayer. Maybe you have a problem and you're waiting for a solution for that problem. Whatever you're waiting on, it's difficult. Waiting is difficult. It's not easy, guys. It's one of the hardest things you're going to do in life is to wait for something. Especially when you want it so bad. But here's some things I want you to remember while you're waiting. First thing is trust God. He can be trusted. He has promised to never leave us or forsake us. He has promised that if you submit yourself to Him, He will be there with you and make your path straight. Trust Him. It's the best thing you'll ever do. Second thing is you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know all the answers. Whenever I told Stephanie that I wanted to be here in the ministry, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't know anything. So I didn't have any answers. I didn't know. So I went and talked to my pastor, my family pastor and youth pastor, and got some answers. But I didn't go into it with all the answers. To be honest with you, I still don't have all the answers. Sometimes you just don't. You don't have to know everything. You know why? Because God knows the future better than we do. We don't have to know the answer. God has. He knows what's going to happen. He knows 5, 10 years from now. He knows what's going to happen. And God's plans are better than anything we can come up with anything.
Amen to that.
I mean, to be all honest with you, growing up I had all kinds of plans of things I was going to do and all those different things. And looking back now, I'm thinking, man, that kind of sucks compared to my life now. I'm not rich and have all kinds of fancy stuff, but I have a pretty good life. And I only have that because I've submitted to God and allowed Him to lead me down that path. His plans are way better than anything we can come up with. And even when we get tired of waiting, let's face it, we're going to get tired of waiting. I get tired of waiting. There's sometimes I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I just can't. I just sit down, I'm like, I can't do it. But then 5 minutes later, I'm like, all right, God, I'll keep going. Because even when we get tired of waiting, God never gets tired of being gracious to us. He never gets tired of being compassionate. He never gets tired of loving us and giving us that nudge that we need. Something I'll never understand because I'm just like, how could you not get tired of us? There's sometimes I use the imagine God shaking his head like, what are you doing, stupid? But he doesn't do that. He loves us and guides us through whatever it is we're doing. No matter what you're waiting on. Guys, God, you can trust God to take care of it. The same God who is patient and gracious towards Abraham and Sarah, who gave them the great nation that he promised, even though they took matters into their own hands and they were impatient and all these things. That same God that was gracious and trustworthy to them, he is patient, gracious, and trustworthy to us as well. But he's the same God. It's not a different God. It's not, it's not a different God than, that God made this, but I'm not. It's the same God that's going to love us through ourselves, our mistakes. We won't always know what God wants or how long it's going to take. We're not always going to know where God's taking us and how long it's going to take to get there. But we have to remember that God has a plan, even if we have to wait on it. He has a plan for us. Sometimes we've got to wait. And while waiting can be frustrating, if we look at it through the right eyes, that anticipation can be so exciting. Because when you read Scripture and you see the promises and you see where God is going to bring us, when the world ends, when He comes back, He's promised to prepare a place for us. God made the world in 7 days, 6 days. Jesus has been preparing a place for us for over 2,000 years. Think of how amazing that place is going to be. And that's exciting to think about. So even though waiting can get frustrating, I encourage you to look at it through a different lens. Look at it through God's eyes. Look at it through what God has promised us. And be excited about where God is leading.